Today, I want to talk from a few minutes from the topic, A Bridge to Forgiveness. And I'm going to use as a text Genesis 45, verse 4 through 8. And this is what it says. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." And they came closer. And he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plow nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on the earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. God has made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of all his house, and ruler over all of the land of Egypt." This has been a noteworthy week. Some of us were interested in who Joe Biden was going to pick as his vice presidential running mate. As you know, Biden had already committed to selecting a woman, but given the racial climate in our country, it behooved him to select a woman of color. There were a few powerful and qualified women on his short list. Although Kamala Harris was on the list, many of us remember how clearly assertive she was against Joe Biden during the Democratic presidential debates. Some would say she was the one who went after Biden the most, and she was on point. Biden and Harris looked more like enemies on that debate stage. Yet when it was time to select who would be best for the country and for the Democratic ticket, Biden selected Harris to run for vice president. What happened between the debate stage and last week? Well, either Biden and Harris were able to lean on that connection that they had through Bo, or they just realized the nature of politics, or they have some honest, amicable, and professional alignment. For whatever reason, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were able to forgive each other enough to try to make the best decision for the good of the nation. Forgiveness. That's something that finds its way into everybody's life. It's sometimes difficult to do, whether it's your spouse, a family member, a friend, a coworker, or even yourself. Forgiveness takes time and effort. The text for this week is a story about forgiveness. The text for today comes out of the book of Genesis, and if you can't find any other book in the Bible, you ought to be able to find Genesis. It's the book of beginnings. From the beginnings of the universe and the various orderings of humankind to the beginning of the people of Israel. The book of Genesis consists of traditions from various historical periods, gradually put together by redactors over a span of 500 years or more. One of the major themes of Genesis is kinship and family. Although these days, through the lens of family systems theory, the families of Genesis really were clearly dysfunctional. But God still has concern and works through family problems. This story of Joseph and his brothers is a perfect example. I invite you to read the whole story of Joseph. It's in the book of Genesis, chapter 37 through 47, and it's a pretty good read. It includes greed, jealousy, sibling rivalry, sex, politics, and palace intrigue. Here's a quick summary. Joseph is favored by his father. His brothers try to get rid of him by putting him in a pit, but instead they decide to sell him as a slave to the Egyptians. And then the wife of a powerful Egyptian tried to seduce Joseph, and when he refused, she said he attacked her, and Joseph was put into prison. While in prison, Joseph became known as an interpreter of dreams. And it was one day he was called upon to interpret a dream for Pharaoh that no one else could interpret. And as Joseph interpreted, he saw 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. And Joseph even told Pharaoh how he could manage the preparation for those 7 years of famine. So Joseph was elevated to oversee all of Egypt. And when the famine came, Joseph's family was not in the land that he managed. So they were experiencing that devastating famine. That's when these brothers went to Egypt seeking help. And as the story goes, Joseph does not hold a grudge, but he welcomes his brothers and the whole extended family to come to Egypt, where he will make sure that they have what they need. You know, I have worked with and witnessed some dysfunctional families, but Joseph's story is extreme. After his brothers sold him as a slave to the Egyptians, what was it that made Joseph welcome and even embrace his brothers? It was forgiveness. Many of us have had periods in our lives where we struggled with forgiveness. It could be like Joseph, we had problems with a family member or with a friend. Perhaps they weren't there when you needed them, or perhaps they were there too much, or perhaps the problem was betrayal, or even some sort of inherited viewpoint, some historical baggage. There are offenses that some of us carry that nobody would even believe or understand. At other times, we carry around guilt and will not even forgive ourselves for something that's in our past. As I thought about Joseph and what all of those years must have been like after being sold by his brothers, there must have been hurt and anger for a time. But somewhere along the way, Joseph was able to forgive. Joseph's situation somehow made me think of Nelson Mandela. How was he able to endure 27 years in prison and come out without holding on to hatred for those who imprisoned him? Mandela said, "As I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave behind my bitterness and hatred, I'd still be in prison." The story of Joseph and the story of Nelson Mandela may be extreme examples of forgiveness, but the need for forgiveness is all the same. Whether the offense was internal or external, we pay an extreme price for unforgiveness. The Mayo Clinic says that there are health benefits to forgiveness. They include healthier relationships, improved mental health, less anxiety, stress, and hostility, lower blood pressure, fewer symptoms of depression, a stronger immune system, improved heart health, and improved self-esteem. This was evident in the story of Joseph, as in the verses that were prior to what I read this morning. Those verses say, "Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, 'Send everyone away from me.' So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. When he saw him, he wept so loudly, the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it." Forgiveness causes an emotional shift within the one who releases that pressure of guilt, anger, resentfulness, and anxiety that accompanies the unforgiveness. It was Isabel Holland who said, "As long as you don't forgive, who and whatever it is will occupy a rent-free space in your mind." Now, this is not new information to many, if not to all of us, but sometimes we need a reminder or maybe a little nudge to go ahead and forgive. Some of us want to forgive or have tried to forgive and could not do it. It's hard to forgive, and there are some offenses that may be unforgivable, things like sexual assault. I think even Jesus had difficulty forgiving the people who abused him so badly as he was leading up to and during his execution. Some people say Jesus forgave them while he was on the cross. I'm really not sure that that's true. Jesus never said, "I forgive you." But he wanted to release that weight of anger, anxiety, and emotional hurt. So he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Some things are just hard to forgive, but I think we can be like Jesus in those cases and ask God to forgive our offenders, just so we can get the weight of unforgiveness off of us. In most cases, however, we need to just go ahead and work through that forgiveness ourselves. I recently read an article by Sanjeev Chura and Gina Vile, and it was entitled "How to Forgive Like Nelson Mandela." And those 9 steps were: number 1, move on. The offense is in the past. Number 2, shift your focus from blame to understanding. Allow yourself to feel what you feel. It's important to honor your hurt, your disappointment, or your anger without blaming others for your feelings. Number 3, avoid telling others what to do or how to react to an incident. Forgiveness will be less necessary, and people will have less opportunity to fall short of your expectations. Number 4, be like water. Don't dominate or try to change people. Go with the flow and accept that humans are flawed. Number 5, take responsibility for your part of the offense. This will minimize your further victimizing yourself. Number 6, be kind instead of right. Resentment only multiplies. Kindness relegates the hurt to the rearview mirror. Number 7, think like a social creature. Put yourself in the shoes of the offender. Consider their possible pressures and try to find empathy. Number 8, don't look for occasions to be offended. If you do, you're going to find them. It's better to assume the best of people. And finally, send love. Love will always feel better than hate. If you need to forgive yourself, take responsibility for the hurt you've caused. Reflect on why it happened. Identify how to avoid future offense. And finally, apologize if you can. Forgiveness is necessary. We saw that in the story of Joseph and his brothers, and how forgiving Joseph was, how he was able to save his whole extended family from famine. Sometimes we have to forgive for the greater good. By looking forward rather than anchoring himself to past offenses, Joseph was able to follow the unfolding divine path that God had for him. As Joseph put it, after all he went through, God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. God has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord of all his house and ruler over the land of Egypt. I'm glad today that God is still unfolding a path for all of us. Like Joseph, we need to make sure unforgiveness is not holding us back. Carolyn Mace said, by far the strongest poison to the human spirit is the inability to forgive oneself or another person. Forgiveness is no longer an option, but a necessity for healing. As I mentioned at the beginning of this message, I'm glad Joe Biden and Kamala Harris knew enough about forgiveness to move forward into a much greater good. Overall, our nation needs citizens who can hold people accountable while at the same time learning to forgive, because there's a lot of reconciliation that's going to be needed and is needed in this country, particularly if we have a chance to change the leadership. Forgiveness is not an option. It's a necessity for the healing of our families, ourselves, our communities, and our nation. Like God did for Joseph, we need to let love be the force that leads us forward. Love is the bridge we cross from offense to forgiveness. Thank you for listening. Thanks for listening. Join us next week at 10 a.m. Eastern Time via Zoom. Send me an email to drkathi100@gmail.com. That's drkathi100@gmail.com. And I'll send you the information so you can join by Zoom. Well, have a great week.